Have you ever noticed how we sometimes confuse freedom with lack of control? As if living without rules was the pinnacle of autonomy, when in fact it may just be a sophisticated form of self-sabotage. What if I told you that true discipline has nothing to do with rigidity, and everything to do with presence, identity, and personal power? We live in an era that idolizes immediate comfort and distrusts any constant effort. But there's a silent paradox in this. The more we seek ease, the harder it becomes to sustain what truly matters. Discipline, the kind that stems from self-knowledge and not guilt, is a key that few value, but that opens the doors to an extraordinary life. Throughout this video, we'll peel back the layers of this much misunderstood concept. We'll understand why self-control is not about saying no to the world, but about saying yes to yourself. Why the right habits don't imprison you, they set you free. And how discomfort, far from being an enemy, can be the greatest sign that you are on the right path. The first illusion we face about self-control is believing it's a constant act of denial. As if living with discipline meant building walls against the world, rejecting pleasures, invitations, and possibilities. But true self-control is more intimate, more silent. It's not about saying no outwardly but saying yes inwardly. About aligning your actions with what, deep down, you already know is important to you. It's a gesture of self-love, not repression. When we talk about discipline, we almost always imagine a scene of sacrifice. Someone gritting their teeth, suffocating desires. But this view is as shallow as it is unfair. Discipline is not a self-imposed punishment. It's a conscious choice for what has lasting value. It's about trading immediate relief for building something that truly matters. As Aristotle said, pleasure in a virtuous life is not lesser, but fuller. Properly understood, discipline is actually the freedom to live with meaning. However, to understand what we are really trying to control, we need to look beyond fleeting impulses. Control is not about silencing desires, but about recognizing which ones are messengers of deep needs, and which are just noise of the moment. Often, we believe we are mastering ourselves when, in fact, we are just distancing ourselves from ourselves. Mature self-control doesn't stifle emotions. It listens to them, interprets them, and acts wisely. Thus, perhaps the real question we should ask ourselves is not, how do I control my impulses? But, where do I want to direct my vital energy? Genuine discipline is not born from brute force, but from inner clarity. It's a pact between who you are now and who you wish to become. Saying yes to yourself is a daily act of respect, not a war against the world, but a dance with what's most authentic within you. We often confuse discipline with hardness, as if it were necessary to become a cold machine to achieve results. But true discipline is fluid, adaptable, alive. It is made of emotional intelligence, the ability to understand your emotions, redirect them, and build routines that respect your limits without abandoning your dreams. Discipline is not about being inflexible, it's about being strategically consistent, like a tree that bends to the wind but never breaks. Building habits that liberate rather than imprison is the forgotten key for many. A healthy habit is born from a deep understanding of what does you good, not from a mechanical imposition. When your routine is a reflection of your conscious choices, it becomes a source of freedom, not a prison. Daily practices, studying, exercising, meditating, stop being chains and become wings. Deep down, true discipline is more pleasurable than chaotic freedom. Controlling is not dominating. This distinction is crucial. Those who try to dominate life through brute force end up tensing so much that they break. Those who practice intelligent self-control understand that life flows better when you guide your actions, but without stifling your natural movement. Dominating is about power. Controlling, in the mature sense, is about awareness. Those who dominate try to overcome themselves. Those who truly control learn to lead themselves as a master leads his horse, with firmness and gentleness. Thus, real discipline is less about discipline and more about self-understanding. When you know your own emotions, your internal rhythms, and your needs, creating a routine becomes an act of care and long-term vision. You stop seeing routine as punishment and start seeing it as a tool for achievement. And so, every small daily act of discipline becomes a silent celebration of your conquered freedom. The belief that we need to be motivated to act is an elegant trap. It offers us a socially acceptable excuse for stagnation. I'm not inspired today. But the truth is that motivation is volatile, and those who depend on it live at the mercy of emotional chance. Real strength, the one that transforms lives, is not born from enthusiasm, but from the decision to act even when you don't feel like it. It is at this moment that inner strength is revealed, when the body resists but the soul chooses to go on. Waiting for the will to act is like waiting for perfect weather every day. It's a luxury real life doesn't allow. Discipline appears as the antidote to this waiting. It reminds you that there won't always be willingness, but there will always be choice. Those who do what needs to be done even without desire build a kind of internal confidence that no motivational speech can offer. It's the silent power of those who don't depend on the tides to row. Tiredness, in turn, is a separate chapter. There is real tiredness which demands rest, care, and pause. But there is also disguised tiredness, the one that serves as an emotional alibi for procrastination. How many times have you said, "I'm exhausted," when in fact you were just bored or afraid to face something? Recognizing this difference is one of the deepest forms of self-knowledge. Because sometimes the body is ready, but the mind flees with elegant excuses. And it's in this space between excuse and action that discipline imposes itself as a kind of moral compass. It does not ignore tiredness but does not bow before it without questioning. It asks you, is this real or disguised resistance? And by answering honestly, you realize that many of your limits were just habits of early surrender. True strength doesn't scream, it persists even in silence. The human mind has been shaped to seek quick rewards. Biologically, we are programmed to prefer now over later. Dopamine, that seductive neurotransmitter, rewards us with pleasure spikes whenever we give in to impulse, whether sliding a finger across a screen, eating something sweet, or avoiding a difficult task. Discipline in this scenario seems to swim against the tide. But what's really at stake is an invisible war between dopamine and direction. The difference between being driven by desire or guided by purpose. Living in the present is a virtue, but not at the expense of the future. There's a fine line between conscious presence and impulsive hedonism. When we choose only what is comfortable now, we create an uncomfortable future. And paradoxically, by choosing some discomfort today like studying, training, or resisting a harmful habit, we are building a life with more genuine pleasure and less regret. Discipline thus becomes a higher form of long-term self-love. Purpose is what reorients our internal compass in the face of daily temptations. It's what gives meaning to sacrifice and turns routine into mission. When you have clarity about where you are going, the no to the immediate stops being renunciation and becomes strategy. And more than that, it becomes freedom. Freedom from being a slave to your own impulses. As Nietzsche said, "He who has a why can bear almost any how." It's this silent strength that transforms will into discipline. And perhaps the most curious thing is realizing that the more you live guided by purpose, the more pleasure you find, not the shallow pleasure of dopamine, but the deep pleasure of integrity. The satisfaction of living aligned with your own values, of sleeping with a clear conscience, of looking back and being proud of the path you've taken. This pleasure, although harder to achieve, has a taste that no instant gratification can offer. The key to personal transformation lies not just in effort but in identity. When you act like someone who is already disciplined, your brain begins to reorganize the beliefs that sustain your habits. It's not about pretending to be something you're not, but about anchoring yourself in a more mature vision of yourself. Lasting change begins when behavior stops being an attempt and becomes an expression of who you choose to become. First you believe, then you prove it to yourself in practice. The idea that identity shapes behavior and not the other way around is supported by studies in behavioral psychology. When you define yourself as someone who takes care of your body, for example, going to the gym ceases to be a one-off effort and becomes part of who you are. Discipline, in this sense, ceases to be a struggle and becomes coherence. Acting like you already are creates a virtuous cycle where habit feeds identity, and identity sustains habit. But there's a crucial point in this process, the end of internal negotiations. Every time you give in to the lazy self, you reinforce a version of yourself that no longer serves you. That self, that only wants comfort, that avoids effort, that promises to start on Monday. It doesn't need to be convinced, it needs to be replaced. Discipline is when you silence that voice and let your future self take the helm. It is at this moment that the future ceases to be an idea and begins to materialize in the present. It's curious how, by acting from that future identity, we begin to attract results that once seemed distant. Because the world responds to what we are, not to what we wish for. And by assuming the role of someone who has already reached where they want to be, your behaviors gain direction, your routine gains consistency, and your self-esteem flourishes. Being disciplined is, deep down, living in agreement with the person you already know you are capable of being, even when no one is watching. The basis of self-control is not willpower, it's clarity. There's no point in trying to control impulses without understanding what feeds them. Behind every repetitive habit, behind every silent act of sabotage, there is an unresolved emotion, an unnamed fear, a need that has not yet been acknowledged. Self-knowledge is the mirror that reveals what is hidden behind behavior. And without this mirror, discipline becomes punishment instead of liberation. Your habits are clues. They reveal where your true desires are and often your true fears. The habit of procrastination, for example, may not be laziness but fear of failure. Impulsive eating may not be hunger but emotional neediness. When you start to investigate the why of each impulse, you discover that discipline is not about saying no to desire, but about decoding it. You stop fighting yourself and begin to listen with greater maturity. It's at this point that discipline reveals itself as a mirror of the unconscious. What do you repeat without thinking? Where do you sabotage yourself every time you start to progress? What happens internally when you run away from something important? Through conscious observation you start to notice the patterns. And by noticing them you can break them. Discipline then ceases to be an exhausting effort and becomes a process of internal alignment. Mind, body, and emotion moving in the same direction. Transformation begins with the right question. What in me is keeping me away from what I say I want? This investigation changes everything. Because you can only control what you know. And you can only sustain discipline when it is coherent with who you truly are. Through self-knowledge, self-control stops being forced containment and becomes an expression of a new consciousness. You stop resisting impulses and start understanding them, and that changes the game completely. There comes a point in the journey when the body screams for rest, the mind craves distraction, and the heart whispers insecurities. At that moment, the right path, the one that demands effort, silence, and persistence, may seem cruel, even inhumane. But it's precisely there that the secret of growth lies. Discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. Often, it's proof that you are, for the first time, stepping outside the bubble that always kept you in the same place. We are biologically programmed to seek comfort. Our brain wants security, repetition, and energy conservation. Yet personal development lives in the opposite. In discomfort, challenge, and exposure to the new. The discomfort that arises from real change is like muscle soreness after a workout, not a sign of injury but a sign of strengthening. Courage, then, is not the absence of fear or doubt, but the decision to move forward even when nothing feels inviting. The biggest mistake is believing that if it's hard, then it wasn't meant to be. This subtle and treacherous belief makes us abandon great journeys at the first curve. But the truth is that inner transformation never comes wrapped in immediate pleasure. It hurts. It demands. It tests. As a Stoic proverb says, if you want to improve, prepare to be ridiculed, despised, ignored. The resistance from the world and your own is an inevitable part of becoming someone new. Therefore, when everything in you asks for comfort, question it. Ask whether that desire to stop is wisdom or sabotage. Whether the silence you seek is peace or escape. Whether the rest you desire is conscious pause or disguised quitting. Sometimes the right path feels wrong simply because you've never walked it before. And that's why growth hurts. Because you need to die to the version of yourself that only knew how to survive. There's a romanticized idea of freedom that, in practice, imprisons. The one that says, do what you want, when you want, how you want. At first glance it seems like autonomy. But if we look closer it's just reaction. A mind that always acts on impulse is not free, it's imprisoned by stimuli, momentary needs, distractions disguised as choices. True freedom requires self-control. And self-control is internal discipline, not external repression. Freedom is not doing everything you want. It's not being dominated by what you desire. It seems paradoxical, but it's profoundly liberating. The truly free person is the one who can say no to what delays, yes to what builds, and does so without suffering because they understand the value of the long term. In a world where everyone follows the path of least resistance, choosing the disciplined path is a radical act of personal sovereignty. It's taking the helm of your own consciousness. The illusion of a light life that permits everything is a slow poison. Because lightness without direction becomes apathy. And permissiveness without criteria becomes self-sabotage. The invisible cycles of repetition, addictions, procrastination, toxic relationships, stagnation, are fruits of misunderstood freedom. The undisciplined mind thinks it is living intensely, but is merely repeating the same patterns in different disguises. With each inconsequential pleasure, a portion of potential slips away. And that's where discipline reveals itself as liberation. When you choose what to do instead of being led by what you feel in the moment, a new way of existing is born. More present, more lucid, more powerful. Discipline tunes the mind like an instrument. It silences the noise of impulses and reveals the music of intention. And so, what once seemed like a prison reveals itself as the deepest form of freedom, being master of yourself. Discipline does not reveal itself in speeches, it reveals itself in the consistency of actions no one sees. While many wait for applause for their intentions, the disciplined keep planting quietly. Real discipline is invisible to those who live hunting for validation. It happens in the mornings when you get up without desire, in the nights when you study even when tired, in the simple no's you say to yourself when no one is watching. It is there, in silence, that the future begins to be born. These small daily choices, almost imperceptible, accumulate a colossal strength over time. Every time you choose what builds instead of what relieves, you are writing a chapter of a story that will one day become admirable. The curious thing is that when the results finally appear, people call it luck. But it wasn't luck, it was the accumulation of conscious decisions, repeated in silence, that shaped a destiny. The noise of the fruits hides the silence of the roots. Winning in the invisible is a rare art because it demands faith without applause. It demands moving forward without guarantees, maintaining the rhythm even without recognition. Today's society values spectacle, but true greatness is built behind the scenes. It is there, far from the screens and likes, that discipline forges character. It is there that you meet your truth, your strength, your resilience. And this encounter, although lonely, is the most transformative one you can have. Therefore, do not underestimate your small acts. They are the ones shaping the structure of your tomorrow. Every disciplined decision is a seed that screams in silence for a fuller future. And sooner or later, that scream echoes. Discipline doesn't need to show off because its fruits speak for themselves. And when they do, no one can ignore them. There's a common, almost instinctive idea that self-control is synonymous with containment, limitation, repression. But this is a shallow and mistaken reading. True self-control doesn't imprison you, it channels you. It transforms dispersed energy into presence, impulsive desire into conscious direction. It's like a dam that doesn't prevent water from existing, but organizes it to generate energy. The strength of self-control isn't in stifling, but in giving form to what you feel, think, and want to build. When you don't waste energy on distractions, procrastination, or impulsive reactions, there's space left for creation. The mind that aligns with the body and both with purpose becomes a high-performance channel. It's in this state of internal coherence that true presence arises. The one that isn't lost in the past nor anticipates the future, but acts powerfully in the now. Discipline then becomes an expression of freedom. You do what needs to be done when it needs to be done with soul, not out of obligation. Discipline doesn't empty life, it structures it. It's the frame that allows the art of your being to reveal itself. Without it, your energy scatters in multiple directions. With it, everything concentrates and intensifies. Focus, clarity, peace of mind. All are born from the same place, well-understood self-control. And the curious thing is, the more disciplined you become, the less effort you need to make. Because everything begins to flow from within, naturally and powerfully. Self-control is not prison, it is power. It is the art of choosing where you invest your vitality. It's transforming impulse into creative action, anxiety into presence, desire into construction. And when this power finds direction, something grand happens. You stop living by inertia and start living by intention. You don't limit yourself. You free yourself. True discipline doesn't shout but transforms. It doesn't need applause or witnesses because its impact is internal and then inevitably external. When you understand that self-control is not a prison but concentrated power, something changes. You stop fighting the world, your impulses, your excuses, and start acting like the person you already dream of becoming. Perhaps the most important thing is this: realizing that every daily choice is not just an action but an affirmation of identity. And that, in the end, the difference between a chaotic life and a full life lies in almost invisible details: what you do when no one is watching, what you refuse when everything in you wants to give in, what you build even when it's hard to believe. Now I ask you, which of these reflections provoked you the most? In which part of the video did you see yourself? Share in the comments, your experience may be the mirror someone else needs. And if this conversation sparked something in you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's much more content coming your way.